All right, so the last section here is learning by observation. And, this is a lot of the stuff that happens, like we talked about, with a lot of our social learning. And some of the big questions with observational learning and why we started to study this was, can we learn new behaviors and skills without conditioning and reward? And the answer is yes. And one of the ways we do this is by watching what happens when other people do a behavior and learning from that experience. Okay, so there are some skills required for this. Obviously, mirroring, which is being able to picture ourselves doing the same thing, and cognition, noticing consequences and associations. And so this is why we start to see this when kids reach a certain developmental point, because they do have to develop those two abilities. So in terms of the observational learning process, there's two kind of major things that we talk about. One is modeling, and this has to do with the behavior of others serves as a model, an example of how to respond to a situation. So we may try this model regardless of any kind of reinforcement. We're just going to try it out. We've seen somebody else do it. Let's try and see if it works for us. Okay, the other one is vicarious conditioning. So vicarious means, kind of our definition of vicarious, is experienced indirectly through others. So vicarious reinforcement and punishments means that our choices are affected as we see others get consequences for their behaviors. So we kind of watch other people be conditioned, and then because of the, either the reinforcement or the punishment that they're receiving, that it's going to start to guide our behaviors as well. Now, one of the first people to study this was a guy named Albert Bandura, and he did what's called a Bobo doll experiment. And basically what he did is, kids saw adults punching an inflated doll while narrating their aggressive behaviors, such as kick him and other things like that. These kids were then put in a toy-deprived situation and acted out the same behaviors that they had seen. And here are some stills from the footage, and we will watch, sorry guys, we will watch the footage in class so you guys can kind of see how this all was carried out. But it really was kind of an eye-opening experiment, because we started to realize how much kids do model adult behavior, and then it really kind of spurred a lot of further studies about, what kinds of behaviors are kids picking up and getting from adults, and how is that affecting development and things like that. So now, in terms of biology, we do know that there is, mirror neurons in our brain, and we do a lot of mirroring in our brain. When we watch others doing or feeling something, neurons fire in patterns that would fire if we were doing the action or having the feelings ourselves. So we do know these mirror neurons in our brain really are an active part of our emotional being. These neurons, only fire to reflect the actions or feelings of others. So mirror neurons, only fire when we're watching. Well, this plays a role, obviously, in our outward behavior, because if you see someone else in pain and then your brain kind of responds to it in pain as well, are you going to take actions to try to prevent, do something, and really work on those feelings? Now, how do we move from mirroring to imitation? Well, humans are prone to spontaneous imitation of both behaviors and emotions, kind of this emotional contagion, if you will. This includes over-imitating, that is copying adult behaviors that have no function and no reward. And interestingly enough, children with autism are less likely to cognitively mirror and less likely to follow someone else's gaze as a neurotypical toddler, such as the one below, is doing. Okay, so what's really kind of interesting about this is that we do know that this mirroring can lead to this emotional contagion, and if kids are exposed to certain behaviors too much, it can become kind of their normal, regular behavior. And we're going to talk about this a lot more in class, and I have some videos and stuff that we're going to talk and discuss regarding this. And some of you might have, passionate viewpoints on things like violent video games, especially the hyper-realistic violent video games. And, if it's that realistic, is it going to be activating those mirror neurons? And what then could that do, in terms of changing, child development? Now, what happens if you have mirroring plus vicarious reinforcement? Where, well, mirroring enables observational learning, and we cognitively practice a behavior just by watching it. So if you combine this with vicarious reinforcement, we are even more likely to get imitation. So for instance, monkey A saw monkey B getting a banana after pressing 4 symbols. Monkey A then pressed the same 4 symbols, even though the symbols were in different places. So we do know that just, this kind of idea of watching plus reinforcement even makes this kind of modeling and this observational learning stronger. So, what about the prosocial effects of observational learning, though? So, prosocial behavior refers to actions which benefit others, contribute value to groups, and follow kind of moral codes and social norms. So, parents try to teach this behavior through lectures, but it may be best taught by modeling, kind of this idea of practice what you preach, parents, right? Especially if the kids can see the benefits of the behavior to oneself and others. So, this is a really important thing. If you are trying to change other people's behavior through this idea of observation, it is really important to make sure that they see you doing what you're telling them to do and not just telling them. Now, what about the antisocial effects of observational learning? Well, antisocial behavior is actions that are harmful to individuals in society. Children who witness violence in their homes are not physically harmed themselves may hate violence, but may still become more violent than the average child. And perhaps this is a result of the Bobo doll effect. Under stress, we do what has been modeled for us because, when we're stressed out, we know that our cognitive patterns change. And so we're going to go to a much more kind of instinctual response necessarily than through the whole cognitive kind of frontal lobe planning, judgment, decision-making type mentality. Now, what about the media models of violence? Do we learn antisocial behavior such as violence from indirect observations of others in the media? And we're going to have a discussion about this in class, but it's something for you to be thinking about. Can you think of examples? Are you pro? Are you con? Are you in the middle? What factors influence that? But research has shown that viewing media violence leads to increased aggression and reduced prosocial behavior. And this violence viewing effect might be explained by imitation, but also by desensitization towards pain in others. All right, so we're going to end there, and we will be discussing this in class.